Welcome to Talent Talks, the podcast where your host, Dan Maisey, dives into hiring's ins and outs. Our goal is to reveal how to attract top talent. Through interviews with leaders in sports, media and entertainment, we explore job search and recruitment trends, offer interview tips and strategies to differentiate yourself and uncover their hiring insights. Whether you're prepping for an interview or interested in hiring trends, Talent Talks is your essential resource. Let's dive in. I'm here with Ben Wells, Chief Executive Officer at PTI Digital for today's Talent Talks. Ben is a forward-thinking leader renowned for his expertise in digital transformation within the sports and entertainment industries. With a deep-seated focus on maximising commercial potential and fan engagement, Ben has successfully led PTI Digital through periods of significant growth and innovation. His career spans over 25 years, during which he has developed a keen acumen for strategic commercial growth, new business development and stakeholder management. Ben's achievements include working with top-tier tech platforms and global brands, making him a key figure in redefining the intersection of technology and sports marketing. His passion for creating long-term value and his progressive approach to business make him a compelling voice on our podcast, where we'll get into his experience and insights on recruitment and talent strategy. So Ben, welcome to Talent Talks. How are you?
After that intro, Dan, I'm on cloud nine. Thank you very much.
No, not a problem. Not a problem. I package those up afterwards, as I've said on a number of occasions, and you can have it for $5. But let's get straight into it. We asked this, as you know, to each one of our guests to begin with. What are your experiences of hiring and being hired, and do you have any lessons learned?
Yeah, I think like most people, Dan, I think it's been a sort of an up and down process. I'm not entirely sure everyone necessarily centres either the candidate or the client in many of the processes, and in many times it can be a numbers game. Throw enough candidates at a job and someone will get hired. On the other hand, I've also had some experiences of very tailored, personalised, caring approaches to various different roles. So that there is a bit of a juxtaposition. I know it's easy and it's quite trendy to bash the recruiters. I know there's a lot of bad ones out there, but I think it's also important to highlight when there have been good experiences as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think we know that there are some fantastic people in the recruitment industry, and this podcast, what we're trying to do isn't trying to give the whole industry a bad name or whatever that is, but there are changes and there are things that need to happen in terms of the wider industry to make it a fairer process, make it more transparent process, and equally make it from a more of a, in your words, up process than a down process. But I suppose getting into that, where you have had good experiences, where it's been tailored and personalised approaches, etc., what are the other things that you found that have really moved the dial in a positive way for you during those recruitment processes versus some of the things that you've seen where you go, you know what, this isn't acceptable, or I'm not going to be doing that again, or I don't want to be part of this because of X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really important, and I think this becomes definitely more relevant as you get older, is that when someone approaches you with a role, or if you apply for a role, I think it's really important at the start for both sides to be clear about why there is a fit or not a fit in that instance. I think it's important to establish that early on. I think it's a small industry and people have long memories, and I think not wasting people's time or raising expectations unnecessarily, I think is absolutely critical. And as I say, the people that I've worked with who, when I have been a candidate myself, I don't tend to hear from until there is actually something which is bang on. And as you've talked about in terms of where I've tried to position myself in the industry over the last 10, 15 years, I'm not interested in a sales job. I'm interested in working for organisations that have that same progressive long-term outlook. So people approach me about straight up sales jobs just aren't going to fly. And I think it's really important when you are recruiting as well. I think it's exactly the same. You've got to be absolutely clear about the skill sets you need and why, and being very, very open with people in the process from day one. And I think there's probably a short-termism, I would say, generally across all parties. And particularly, I think I see a lot of short-termism from candidates early on in their career who are probably at that age and understandably motivated by moving somewhere for more money, which I completely get, particularly in these times. But, I've had people just not turn up to interviews when I've been recruiting in the past. And I think, well, do you know what? Never, ever, ever consider that person for a role in the future. And people playing us off against leverage for getting a better salary in their current job. We remember all these things, and it's not a good game to play. So I think there's things that could be a lot better on all sides. And as I say, it's very easy just to bash one side of it. But I do think, and there's definitely a lot that could improve on that side, which is obviously what you're trying to do. But I do think people need to take a longer term approach to this space from all sides.
I think, and it comes back to something you said in your initial answer around numbers game. And I think that's not that. I think that's both sides. I think that is candidates nowadays not really doing the research or really looking into what they want to do and where they want to go, and potentially not having the support in order to do that as well. And that's a separate subject. Yeah. And I think the LinkedIn Easy Apply button, and I've said this a couple of times as well, but I think that has led to candidates just going, actually, that sounds interesting. It's easy to apply. Let's crack it in. And if you then got down to a situation where you were a favoured candidate, if you don't really do the research, don't really understand who the company are or what the industry is, if you even get that far, then you do get to a point where you have people that, as you say, oh, right, okay, well, I'm just going to use this to get a pay rise, or I use this to not really bother and not really turn up. So I think part of it is a lack of understanding sometimes on the candidate part about the amount of work that needs to be done, because we touched on it before we started recording, but the market at the moment is quite slow. There are a fair amount of candidates out there, and so in order to stand out, what have you got to do in order to stand out? And part of that is making sure that you're aware as a candidate about where you want to go, what you're trying to do, and how you differentiate and how you get your skills and extrapolate them out.
That's 100% right. And it's an obvious first question to ask when I'm interviewing. I always ask people why they want to work here. And that question almost always weeds out those that have done their research and are genuine about the opportunity and those that are just fishing. And I remember once when I was at Bath Rugby, a candidate, when I asked that question, responded that she wanted to get onto the property ladder and it was too expensive in London. And this felt like a good opportunity. And I thought, firstly, she clearly never looked at property prices in Bath, but secondly, just what an awful answer. And I decided within 5 minutes that this person was not a suitable person for this. The priorities are all the wrong way around. So it's absolutely critical, absolutely, that all sides are clear on what it is they're trying to achieve from the process. Otherwise, it ends up being a waste of people's time.
And in that situation, and just purely out of interest, did you end the interview there, or did you carry on throughout the full interview, and however long it was supposed to be anyway?
Well, this person had travelled up from London, so I gave them the opportunity to redeem themselves. But I did have one candidate in the same process turn the question back on me and ask why he should work for us. And I thought, well, that's a pretty bold approach. And it's sort of the interview carried on in that vein and lasted about 15 minutes. So it's sort of, why did that person turn up? They hadn't done any preparation and just seemed to be intent on being awkward. So yeah, it's very strange. But as I say, all I'm going to do is cross that person off the list of any future process. So it's a weird way to go about it.
That sounds like someone who's listened to a podcast or watched a video and thought, I've got to go in with confidence and bullishness.
Yes, possibly, exactly. Maybe they've been badly advised. I don't know what it was. But yeah, as I say, I think there's room for improvement on all sides.
100%. And in terms of what you're doing now with PTI and the teams that you're growing there, what have you taken on from your past experiences that you make sure that you include within the process at the moment? And similarly, again, related to the kind of question that I said earlier, what do you make sure that you completely avoid?
Well, we're quite a strange business. We do have some teams who are office-based, so we run a managed services business out of CBS Arena in Coventry, and we have a team also based there servicing CBS. And then we have a team at Ashton Gate in Bristol, but the rest of the company is virtual. So we are, and whilst obviously a lot of people got used to that and quite like that, having gone through the COVID years, there are many people that don't. And I think we had to be cognizant. It's all right for us who are a bit longer in the tooth, who maybe have had the opportunity to move into bigger houses. And I'm calling you from my office. Many youngsters do not have that luxury. They're renting in cities, and their office is also their bedroom. And that becomes very invasive, particularly for women. but also you spend the whole day in the same room. So we're very cognizant of when we're going through the process of having to be completely transparent with people about how we work and trying to build in flexibility around that, recognizing that it's let's say people like the flexibility, particularly they've got kids, being able to do all that kind of stuff, but also it can be quite lonely for some people. So making sure that we are very transparent at the start about the way that we work, ensuring that we are providing a lot of support to them either through the management team or through external support mechanisms that we have in place, but also making sure that we get people together, making sure they're out at clients as often as possible, because people are social animals ultimately, and it can be a problem for people who feel like they are isolated. And it's actually we run an internal staff survey every 6 months, and it's a question we always ask in that about how do people feel about their current work setup, and do they feel isolated, and all that kind of stuff. Do they have the right support in place to help them with that? So that's something probably pre-COVID you would never really have thought about particularly. And so centering the candidate and then potentially the employee in that is absolutely critical, because, as you know, finding good people is very, very difficult. And having found someone, it would be a crying shame then to lose them because we can't get the working environment right for them.
And have you found, post-pandemic specifically, that there has been an increase in people applying because you are not only working from home, but actually the flexibility side of things, which I think is becoming more and more critical for everybody anyway? Or is it a kind of similar numbers from pre and post?
I mean, we hired a lot of people during COVID, and I have to be honest, that was, it was done with all the right intentions at the time. We had to do everything virtually in terms of the hiring process. And in my mind, we had quite a high turnover off the back of that process, because you don't really get a chance to speak to people properly, get to know them, and probably there were a few fits in there that probably weren't quite right. But I mean, look, when you think about what motivates people to join a company, there are many reasons for that, and we have to be cognizant of the fact that we're a challenger business. We're not as well set as some of the more established companies in our space, and so we have to be as agile as we can and understand where we can offer competitive options for people, whereas others might be able to offer different things. So we've recognized the need, as I say, to ensure that people are able to organize work around their lives rather than the other way around. It's something we are very, very keen on. And so that's a key part of what we offer people, is what is it that works for you. And it's interesting that I remember I had someone join us a few years ago, and this guy had worked in an office, his whole life, and was getting used to working from home, being responsible for his own time, and sort of kept messaging me saying, I'm just going to pop out with the dog for 20 minutes. It was quite sunny and I could do that. I said a message about it. I don't care. I don't care. The key is ultimately is that you've got a set of results, set of objectives you've got to deliver. However you do that, I'm pretty relaxed. And if it's a nice sunny half an hour, and God, we need nice sunny half an hours at the moment, and the dog needs walking and needs some fresh air, go and walk the dog. If that's going to get you half an hour to reset and come back stronger, that's what we've got to do, isn't it? I think that is still a challenge. I mean, I do think presenteeism is still an issue in some organisations, and I do understand it, because I think a lot of people also take the mickey when they're working from home. And so finding a balance, again, it comes back to everyone has to play their part in it. We can moan about the evil boss not recognising my needs, but also evil boss has got numbers to hit and a business to run. And if he or she doesn't trust that people are delivering what they should be able to do from home, they're abusing that goodwill, then they have to do something about it. So it's down to all of us to be grown-ups about it and find that compromise.
Yeah, and I think, if I'm honest, I think working from home is a genuine skill, and it's something that can be improved on once you get into that kind of, get used to, as you say, being in the same environment, less social interaction, and you then need to go and find that social interaction elsewhere. And I think certain roles and certain jobs are inherently crave more social interaction and kind of creative side of things compared to some of the other ones. And I think there needs to be a good balance there. In terms of how you've found the remote side of things from a leadership perspective, I'm not just necessarily talking from a recruitment and hiring perspective, but put out of interest, How have you found managing and leading a company when you're not there in front of them, if that makes sense? You're not there, you're not that kind of visible, as it were, leader in the office, but you are there on the end of the phone ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, look, we have a pretty much an open door policy. I think what was when so just to be clear, I've been running the company now for the last 15 months or so. So my predecessor set the company up and was the CEO for its first 4.5 years, and it is challenging being remote. But I think what is key is as a leader, you're not just thinking through your own lens, you're thinking about everyone else and understand the different needs that people have. And we wanted to set out at the start a very transparent relationship. So ultimately, we do 6 monthly get-togethers in person, and we take everyone through the numbers and we talk about the company objectives, and we have an open session on that. That's usually built around a social. We'll then have a quarterly update in between as well. We have a weekly email that goes out that everyone contributes to, and regular all staff chat on Teams, which can be everything from how's the company fantasy football league going through to someone's had a baby or whatever, or people sharing industry news. So we try and ensure that there's as much of that, that we can do as possible. But yes, it's an open door policy. I mean, for all of us, we make it very clear to people that if they've got an issue or they want to discuss something, the door is open. And as I say, throughout our 6 monthly employee surveys, that's something which we always score very highly on as a leadership team, having that availability and that transparency, and people feeling that they can put their arms up and ask a question or challenge if something isn't right or could be improved upon. I think that's really, really important. I don't think you can sit there and say, I've got all the answers because I'm the CEO. I just think that's a lazy and arrogant way to think about it. So we do try and engage people on that. And of course, look, some people are happy to put their arms up, some are not. That's just human nature. But yeah, I mean, it's something we're always looking at and working at how we can improve on, because the one thing I do miss, not the one thing I do miss is that when you're in office with people, you could pick up on body language, you could pick up on little signs, changes in behaviours, spot that something's probably not quite right with that person. You can have a little chat. I think you can put a mask on a half an hour long Teams call, and then you never quite know how that person is as soon as they turn the video off. And is that person struggling, or have they got some issues away from work that I think that's the biggest challenge. So we do try and check in with people, and often I'll just ring someone if I've got 5 minutes and I can see that they're online and they're free. I'll ring them up and just see how they're doing and catch up. And other members of the leadership team do that as well. And we have a fairly open conversation, open dialogue and structure in terms of how we communicate as a leadership team as well. So there's always room for improvement, but I think we've got a lot of good things in place.
Yeah, I think there's what's coming through through a lot of this conversation and what you're saying is the transparency element, and that comes back down to the being open and honest with the team around the wider company numbers and the company objectives, and understanding how people fit into that. On that front, is there I suppose, a specific talent strategy that is part of those objectives? Does it feed into those wider organisational objectives, and how do you then communicate that back in terms of the wider picture for the staff?
So I think one thing that is massively important is, and look, if you're going to work in a virtual or remote organisation, you have to trust that the people you've hired are A, understand what they're supposed to be doing, B, will put their hand up if there's a problem, C, are able to get on with the job and what have you, because I don't want to be micromanaging people. I'm not a micromanager, and none of our exec team are either. So you need to hire grown-ups. You need to hire people you can trust, people that want to be here. They've joined us for the right reasons. And so we have quite a rigorous hiring process when we go through that, because we are a small organization. There's 30 of us. We can't really afford to hire the wrong people. So we do make sure that we are pretty clear. And again, I think we've probably veered towards this sort of filter more and more. Is I'd much rather hire the person with the right attributes personally than necessarily professionally. Even though a lot of our team are highly skilled technically, a lot of that can be learned and can be taught. But the kind of attributes that we're looking for, so the ability to work in a remote organization, self-starting, very sort of motivated to deliver what they've been tasked to do, that often can't be trained. I mean, that's just, you either got that or you don't. And so we've got a lot of great people in the business that work like that, and it becomes self-policing. And as I say, over the last 18 months, we've been looking at all sorts of things around where we can do better. And we've brought in the last 18 months, we've done full company-wide salary reviews. We've brought in private healthcare. We've massively improved pension contributions. We've spent a lot of time on developing personal development plans for people. All this sounds quite basic, but as a young company, this was all stuff that was missing. But people told us through the surveys this was important to them. These kinds of things are really important. So, of course, everyone wants to get paid more, but that's not always possible. So we looked at all the things that people said were important, and that has led, I think, to us being able to sort of, I think, help retain staff a lot better, because I think, A, it's a better place to work, and B, people feel like they're being listened to. I hope that's the case. I'm just looking through the survey number 3 results at the moment, and that seems to be the case. But again, it's important that we're not just waiting every 6 months, that there is an open door policy that people can come and say, have you thought about this? One thing we're looking at the moment is what else is important to people around things like sustainability and that kind of thing. Is where can we as a company do better? How do we develop that pride in the employer? And I think that's, again, massively, massively important.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting there is that it's clear that your staff feel listened to. Now, you did mention there around having hired the wrong people in the past. How have you approached that when you've realised that it is the wrong person?
I don't think we necessarily hired the wrong people. I think, again, it's a two-way thing. I don't think we were necessarily clear on what we were trying to hire. And so you end up in a situation where you got some very good people, very talented people, and it's a square peg in a round hole, and it just wasn't the right fit. So, and look, these are all learning processes. I think when these things happen, there's no fault really on either side. It's one of those things that just doesn't work out. I don't think you can go down the "it's not you, it's me" approach. I don't think that particularly helps. But I just think you have to approach it with a level of openness and maturity. And look, some people respond to that and say, look, I get what you're saying. You're right. It's not necessarily been the right fit, or it's not worked out as we would have liked. Let's shake hands and part company, and we'll be grown-ups about it. Not everyone does that, of course, but it is a fact of life. But I think, as I say, that the amount of, if you can put more effort and more thought into the hiring process, and often saying, look, none of the candidates that have come through the process are right for us. We're not going to hire. We're going to go again. We're going to try a different approach, rather than let's just hire him or her because she was the best or he was the best of that bunch. And you can't be going into those things with doubts about you. You've got to know before you pull the trigger. It's like getting married. I mean, you don't just. You've got to take that sort of long term. This is a serious commitment on both sides. We've got to think this through.
I think the long term element to that is the critical piece. Is actually, I think a lot of organisations are fairly guilty of not necessarily taking a longer term approach because they've got something to meet. They have to bring somebody in yesterday in order to meet client needs or whatever. But I think there is a more flexible approach that can be taken on that front. Like
there is. I mean, look, we have a very talented bench. We call it a group of associates with varying skill sets that we're able to farm work out to. If something comes in which takes us beyond capacity, I'm very keen that we are not overworking people. That's not always the case, and that's something we've got to get better at. But I would much rather bring in someone off the bench to manage a project, and we try and get ahead of it. If things, we're always looking forward 2 or 3 months to look at what the pipeline looks like, what existing client commitments look like, and have we got the right resource in place, and do we need to line someone up, rather than rushing to market to hire someone. And particularly at this time, I think, where everyone is sort of holding what they have until we get past the election and interest rates coming down and all those other various things that are, I think, affecting confidence in the economy. So I think having that flex is also very, very important. And I think as a business, you need to be thinking about, we can't just be, we've got work, we need to hire someone. Because the amount of time it takes to write out job specs, if you're going to do it properly, and then go through the proper hiring process and interview process and all that kind of stuff, But by that time, the project's been and gone and you've lost it. So you do need to take a much longer term view, looking at if our numbers are projected to be this next year, what's the resourcing we're going to need to support that? Let's get in the market now and back ourselves that we will have the work in place to hit the numbers we've talked about, and therefore we've got the people. So it's always a juggling act, not being over resourced, not being under resourced. So you've got to have the flexibility in there.
Yeah, no, completely agree. Look, Ben, it's been a really fascinating conversation so far, but I'm also very conscious of time and I don't want to keep you for too much longer, but I do want to have enough time to get into our final 3 quickfire questions, which, as you know, we ask every single guest. So let's get straight into the first one. What is your most frustrating thing about recruitment?
I think, in a word, it's about honesty. And I think, as I said at the start, I think it's everyone being honest. I've had it as a candidate where I know I've just been a number, particularly when I was younger, one of a number, and the recruiter doesn't really care who gets hired because ultimately someone's going to get hired and they'll get their commission. I find it frustrating with candidates who don't take the time to invest in it properly, and those who you can tell immediately are just here because they've got 3 or 4 jobs, and conversely, they if they get one of those, then they're happy. They don't really care which one. That's not the kind of person I want to hire either. And so I think there needs to be a lot more, as I say, honesty on all sides around what it is they're trying to achieve from the process and what kind of person they either want to hire or what kind of job the candidate really wants and what they can bring to the role. So I think often people hire or go into processes for the wrong reasons, and that comes through, I think, quite clearly. And I do think that you need to play the long-term game in all these, both as a candidate and as a recruiter or a company hiring, because it is a small industry.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Second one, and you don't have to name them, but you are more than welcome to. Who has been your best hire and why?
I thought about this long and hard because I've had the fortune to hire some terrific people, and it's very difficult to say over sort of 25 years. I guess it's probably maybe 20 years as a hirer, as a recruiter. But I hired someone into my team at Bath Rugby not long after I started, and just it was it's brilliant watching this person, how they've grown. I won't give away the sex so that people narrow it down, but this person was just wonderful bundle of energy, indefatigably positive about everything, and this person's energy just changed the entire dynamic in a team. It was fantastic, and this person probably doesn't even know they're doing it, but that kind of hire. I mean, and also, very, very talented and able to turn their hand to all sorts of different things, and was always happy, whatever it was, to do it and to do it to a very high standard. And trying to find someone like that is like gold dust, because it just has this multiplier effect on the people around them.
And then I think we probably know the answer to this one, but final question from me. What is the one thing that you would change about the recruitment world?
Yeah, I think going back to the first answer, I think there needs to be a greater deal of transparency around it. I think there's a lack of accountability on both sides. People probably don't know why they haven't got roles, and I find it frustrating, and I'm sure other people do as well. You put an awful lot of effort in, and you think you've done all the research and done and haven't got through, and you never get any feedback. It's something that we're always very, very keen to do, is explain to people why it wasn't the right fit or the right time or whatever else, and you just get jettisoned. So I think that's something. I don't know what that's particularly like now, because I haven't been in a process like that for a long, long time, but I think that's something that I think probably hasn't changed a huge amount. And it all comes down to, as I say, long-term thinking around relationships, and remembering that ultimately there's a person at the end of it. I know people are thinking about, well, there's a commission here regardless, but there are disappointed people, and the vast majority of people in the process are going to be disappointed. So certainly from our side, and I would say this as well, if you're hiring, it's really important that you take the time to feed back to people, even if they've been a terrible interviewer or interviewee, I should say. It is important that you feed back, because everything should be a learning experience, and everything should be an opportunity for development. So I think the more you put into that, the more you'll take out longer term.
Yeah, it's such an emotional experience for a candidate that
It really can be.
Yeah,
And there are people out there as well. I mean, I've seen this happen where it's not just a case of moving job. to another job, but it's actually a case of, look, if I don't get this job, I'm screwed. I don't know what I'm going to do. And that's no reflection on something. They might have had a bad run of luck or be in a tough place or whatever else it is. And that makes, an enormous difference to people's lives. And I think that doesn't mean they should just necessarily get the job, but certainly if they're in that situation and they've interviewed well and they don't get it, they don't get any feedback. I mean, that can be absolutely crippling for people. And we do need to think about the person who's involved in that. I know, particularly in roles, and I had it when I worked at Chelsea. I remember the last job that I hired for there, we had 200 plus candidates. It's not physically possible to give everyone a personal experience, but I think certainly those ones that you get to interview and then don't get it, which will still be the majority, you have a duty of care to them to give them a good experience.
Yeah, completely agree. And we could delve into that in a much more detail, but I'm conscious of time. So, Ben, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on. I think there's a lot of things that people can take out on that. So, again, thanks again for coming on Talent Talk.
Thanks for having me on, Dan. It's been good fun. Thank you.